The afternoon sun of early autumn, a soft, forgiving gold streamed through the stained glass windows of St. Jude's Community Church, painting the expectant faces of the congregation in hues of ruby and sapphire. The year was 1926, and in the small, hard-working town of Harmony Creek, nestled in the rolling hills of rural Pennsylvania, a wedding was a rare and joyous occasion for all. The air in the small wooden church was thick with the scent of pine polish, dried lavender, and the collective, hopeful anticipation of a community gathered to witness the beginning of a new life. At the front of the church, standing before the altar, was Abigail Lytton. At 55 years of age, she was not a blushing, youthful bride. She was a woman whose life had been a quiet study in duty and deferment. Thou spinster, as the less charitable townsfolk might whisper, though always out of her earshot, for Abigail was a figure of quiet respect in Harmony Creek. She had nursed her aging parents through their final illnesses with tireless devotion, managed the town's small library with a gentle, scholarly precision, and her small home was known for having the most beautiful rose garden in the county. She had long ago made peace with a life of solitude, finding companionship in her books and her garden. A grand romance, she believed, was a chapter meant for other people's stories, until Mr. Thomas Cole had arrived. He had come to town 6 months prior, a charming, silver-tongued salesman from the city, representing a new line of farming equipment. He was a man in his late 50s, a widower with a booming laugh and a way of making a woman feel as if she were the only person in the room. He had been captivated, he'd claimed, by Abigail's quiet grace and intelligence. He had courted her with a whirlwind of flowers, picnics, and promises of a shared, comfortable future. For Abigail, it had been a dizzying, bewildering dream. To be seen, to be courted, to be chosen, after a lifetime of being overlooked. It was a late blossoming flower in the autumn of her life, and she had embraced it with a tentative, hopeful joy. When he had proposed, she had accepted, her heart fluttering with a feeling she had thought long lost to her. Now she stood at the altar, a vision of quiet, mature elegance. She wore a simple but beautifully tailored dress of deep pearl grey, a string of her mother's pearls around her neck. Her hair, more silver than brown now, was pinned neatly under a modest hat adorned with a single silk rose. She was nervous, but a soft, happy smile touched her lips. Today, her real life would finally begin. The organist played softly, the familiar hymns a comforting murmur. The town was all here, the mayor, the postman, the women from her book club. She saw them all, their faces turned towards her, smiling in shared celebration. She also saw Dr. Alistair Finch, sitting alone in a pew near the back, as was his custom. Dr. Finch was the town's silent, steadfast pillar. A man in his early 60s, a widower himself for many years, he was known for his quiet competence, his gentle hands, and his deep, thoughtful eyes. He was a man of few words, his conversations usually limited to the diagnosis of an ailment or a polite inquiry about a family's health. He observed the world with a calm, watchful intensity, his expression perpetually one of gentle melancholy. He and Abigail shared a quiet, respectful friendship, born of their shared love for books borrowed from her library. Seeing him there, his presence so solid and reassuring, calmed her nerves. The clock at the back of the church chimed, its 3 deep bongs marking the hour. The ceremony was meant to begin at 3 o'clock. A nervous cough rippled through the congregation. The organist, after a questioning glance at the pastor, began to replay a hymn. Abigail's smile faltered slightly. Thomas was late. He was likely just held up, she told herself, a last-minute detail with a client. He was a busy man after all. She clasped her hands together, her palms suddenly slick with a nervous sweat. The clock chimed the quarter hour. The murmuring in the pews grew louder, shifting from anticipation to a low hum of confusion and concern. The pastor gave Abigail a strained, reassuring smile, but his own anxiety was evident. Abigail's heart began to beat a heavy, painful rhythm against her ribs. The beautiful dream was beginning to fray at the edges. She looked towards the back of the church, at the large double doors through which her groom was meant to enter. They remained stubbornly, cruelly closed. Her gaze drifted to Dr. Finch. He was no longer looking at the altar. He was watching her, his brow furrowed, his usual calm expression now replaced with one of deep, empathetic concern. It was the postman's son, a boy of about 12, who delivered the final fatal blow. He came running into the church, his face red and out of breath, and skidded to a halt in the aisle. He held up a small sealed envelope. "For Miss Lytton," he panted. "The station master said to give this to you. It came from Mr. Cole. He got on the 2:30 train out of town." A collective gasp went through the church. The word struck Abigail with the force of a physical impact, knocking the very air from her lungs. He got on the train. He had left. He had run. Her hands trembled as she took the envelope. Her fingers, suddenly clumsy and numb, fumbled with the seal. The entire town watched in a horrified, breathless silence as she unfolded the single sheet of paper inside. The note was short, its words a masterpiece of casual cruelty. "My dearest Abigail, I find I cannot go through with it. A man in my position requires a wife of a certain vitality, someone to match my energy for the years to come. I realize now that our union would be a mistake. I wish you a comfortable and quiet life. My sincerest apologies for any inconvenience. Yours, Thomas Cole." Vitality. The word was a slap in the face. It was his polite, cowardly way of saying she was too old. She had been weighed, measured, and found wanting. The public declaration of his love had been a lie, and its retraction was now an even more public humiliation. The note slipped from her nerveless fingers and fluttered to the floor. The church, once filled with hopeful anticipation, was now a cavern of pitying stares and hushed, scandalized whispers. The dream had not just ended. It had shattered, leaving her standing alone amidst the wreckage, the object of the entire town's pity. She stood frozen at the altar, the beautiful stained glass light suddenly feeling harsh and accusatory. She could feel the color draining from her face, the room beginning to tilt. She wanted to run, to hide, to simply vanish. But there was nowhere to go. She was trapped on the stage of her own heartbreak. But then, through the haze of her shock and shame, she saw a movement at the back of the church. It was Dr. Finch. He stood up, his tall, lean frame a figure of quiet authority. He did not look at the gossiping townspeople. He looked only at her. His face held no pity, only a deep, profound understanding and a quiet, righteous anger on her behalf. Slowly, deliberately, he began to walk down the aisle. His footsteps were the only sound in the otherwise silent church, a steady, rhythmic counterpoint to the frantic, panicked beating of Abigail's heart. He walked past the rows of stunned faces, his gaze never leaving hers. He was not coming to offer condolences or empty platitudes. He was coming, she realized, simply to stand with her. He reached the front of the church and stopped before her. He did not speak. He simply stood beside her, a silent, steadfast presence, facing the congregation as if to say, "She is not alone." He then bent down, picked up the cruel, discarded note from the floor, and without reading it, crumpled it in his fist, a small, definitive act of defiance. He then turned to her, his kind eyes looking directly into hers. "Abigail," he said, his voice a low, gentle rumble that was meant for her alone. "This is not your shame. It is his." His simple words, his quiet, unwavering presence, were a lifeline. They did not erase the hurt or the humiliation, but they gave her an anchor in the storm. He was not trying to fix her. He was simply refusing to let her stand in the wreckage alone. In the midst of the most profound humiliation of her life, Abigail Lytton was not looking at the faces of those who pitied her, but at the face of the one man in the room whose respect she had not lost. And in the quiet strength of the town doctor's eyes, she found the first fragile seed of a cure for a wound she had thought would be fatal. The air in St. Jude's remained thick, with a horrified, fascinated silence. The entire town seemed frozen in place, a tableau of open mouths and wide, pitying eyes. Abigail felt like an insect trapped in amber, preserved forever in this single, perfect moment of her own humiliation. It was Alistair Finch's quiet, steady presence beside her that finally broke the spell. "Come, Abigail," he murmured, his voice low and for her ears only. He gently placed a hand on her elbow, a simple, supportive touch that grounded her in the swirling chaos of her own thoughts. Let us leave this place." He did not wait for a response. With a calm, deliberate authority, he began to guide her down the aisle. The crowd of townspeople parted before them like the Red Sea, their whispers and stares like a physical force that she could feel on her skin. She kept her gaze fixed on the floor, on the steady, reassuring movement of Dr. Finch's polished black shoes. He did not hurry her. He walked at her pace, his tall frame a protective shield between her and the prying eyes of the community. He led her out of the church and into the bright, unforgiving autumn sunlight. The world outside seemed obscenely cheerful, the leaves on the maple trees a riot of gold and crimson, mocking the grey, desolate landscape of her heart. His doctor's automobile, a modest but well-kept Ford Model A, was parked nearby. He helped her into the passenger seat with the same gentle care he would use for a frail patient, then walked around to the driver's side. He did not take her home. To return to her small house, with its carefully prepared decorations for a wedding reception that would never happen, would be another form of torture. Instead, he drove the short distance to his own office, a small, respectable brick building on Main Street, next to the pharmacy. "I think a cup of tea is in order," he said simply as he led her inside, "and perhaps a moment of peace." His office was a reflection of the man himself, clean, orderly, and quietly reassuring. The walls were lined with medical texts, the air smelled faintly of antiseptic and leather, and a kettle was already beginning to whistle softly on a small electric stove in the corner. It was a place of healing, a sanctuary from the judgment of the outside world. He sat her down in a comfortable patient's chair and prepared the tea, his movements economical and calm. He handed her a warm cup, his fingers brushing against hers for a moment. He then took his own cup and sat in the chair opposite her, not speaking, simply allowing her the space and the silence to breathe. For a long time, the only sound was the soft ticking of the clock on the wall. The first tears began to slide down Abigail's cheeks, silent, hot tracks of grief and shame. She did not sob. Her heartbreak was as quiet and as dignified as the rest of her life had been. "I feel so foolish," she finally whispered, her voice a raw, broken thing. "A foolish old woman playing dress-up as a bride. I should have known. A man like that. Why would he ever want someone like me?" "The foolishness, Abigail, belongs entirely to Thomas Cole," Alistair said, his voice firm but gentle. "He is the one who has shown himself to be a man of no character, no honor. What he has done is a reflection of his own cruelty, not of your worth." "But the whole town saw," she murmured, staring into her teacup. "They all saw him abandon me. I'm a laughingstock, the 55-year-old spinster who was left at the altar. How can I ever face them again? How can I stand in the library and check out books for their children, knowing they are all whispering, pitying me?" She looked up at him, her eyes filled with a new kind of despair. "I cannot stay here, Alistair. I cannot. But where would I go? I have nothing, no one." The weight of her predicament settled in the quiet room. She was trapped by her age, by her limited means, and now by a public humiliation that would follow her for the rest of her days in this small town. Alistair set his teacup down, a thoughtful, contemplative expression on his face. He looked around his office at the stacks of medical journals, the overflowing filing cabinets, the general orderly disarray of a busy, solitary man. "Abigail," he began slowly, choosing his words with a physician's care, "I find myself in a predicament of my own. A different sort, to be sure, but a predicament nonetheless." She looked at him, her own grief momentarily forgotten in her surprise. "My wife Eleanor, as you know, passed away many years ago," he said, his voice softening at the memory. "She was the great love of my life. She was also the heart of our home. She was an avid reader, even more so than you or I. Our house is filled with her books, thousands of them. They line the walls, they sit in stacks in the attic. It is a magnificent collection, a history of her mind and her heart." He paused, a sad smile touching his lips. "But since her passing, it has fallen into chaos. I have always meant to catalogue them, to create a proper library in her memory, but the task is overwhelming. And, if I am being honest, the memories in that room are still too sharp. I need someone with a librarian's skill, a scholar's mind, and a gentle soul to bring order to that chaos. to honor her memory in a way that I have been unable to." He leaned forward, his gaze direct and sincere. "I also find myself in need of a housekeeper, a respectable woman to manage my home, which has been run by a series of well-meaning but temporary helpers for years. It is a large house for one man, and it needs a steady, guiding hand." He let his words settle before continuing. "I am offering you a position, Abigail, a job, to be my private librarian and the manager of my household. I can offer you a fair salary, a private suite of rooms in my home, and a purpose that is both respectable and, I believe, suited to your unique talents. It would be a mutually beneficial arrangement. You would have a sanctuary, away from the prying eyes and wagging tongues of this town. And I," he said, with a hint of genuine vulnerability, "would have my home and my wife's legacy put back in order." Abigail stared at him, utterly stunned. He was offering her an escape, but he had framed it not as an act of pity, but as a solution to his own problems. He was not rescuing a damsel in distress. He was hiring a professional. He was valuing her for her skills, for her mind, for the very qualities that made her her. It was an unconventional prescription, a strange and unexpected cure for her current ailment. To go from being the town librarian to a private librarian and housekeeper, to live in the home of Dr. Finch, a man she had respected from afar for years. It was a dizzying prospect. "Alistair, she started, unsure of what to say. "You do not need to answer now," he said kindly. "Take your time. Think about it, but know that the offer is genuine. It is born of a true need on my part and a deep respect for you." But Abigail did not need time. She looked at the man before her, at his kind, steady eyes, at the sincerity etched into the lines of his face. His offer was a harbor in the midst of a hurricane. It was a quiet, respectable path away from the public shame that awaited her. It was a chance to do what she loved, to be with books, and to find a new purpose when she thought all was lost. "Yes," she said, her voice quiet but firm with a newfound resolve. "Yes, Dr. Finch. I accept your offer. And I would be honored." A look of profound relief washed over Alistair's face, and he gave her a small, genuine smile. "The honor is all mine, Abigail," he said. "Now finish your tea. Then, if you are feeling up to it, we can go to your house and pack a few of your things. Your new life can begin this afternoon." As Abigail took a sip of her now lukewarm tea, she felt the first fragile tendril of hope unfurl in her heart. Her wedding day had ended in a disaster, but perhaps, just perhaps, her love story was only just beginning. Dr. Alistair Finch's home was not a mansion of imposing grandeur, but a large, respectable Victorian house set back from the main road at the edge of town, nestled amongst a grove of old, wise-looking oak trees. It was a doctor's house, solid and dependable, its brick facade softened by climbing ivy, its wide front porch inviting and comfortable. Yet, as Alistair led Abigail up the front steps, she could feel a profound stillness about the place, a quiet melancholy that seemed to emanate from the very walls. It was a house that had been without a true heartbeat for a very long time. "My wife Eleanor designed the gardens," Alistair said quietly as he opened the door. "She loved roses, just as you do." The inside was a testament to a life well lived, but now frozen in time. The furniture was comfortable and of good quality. The oriental rugs were worn in pathways of familiar use, and every surface seemed to hold a memory. But there was a fine layer of dust on the mantelpiece, a stack of old newspapers on a side table, a general air of benign neglect. It was the home of a man who had lost his center, a man who was merely existing within the framework of a life that had once been vibrant. "Jennings, my housekeeper before you, was a good man, but his eyesight was failing," Alistair explained, a hint of apology in his tone. "Things have been left to their own devices for a while." He led her through the downstairs rooms, showing her the kitchen, the parlor, the dining room. Then he stopped before a set of handsome oak double doors. "And this," he said, a new note of reverence in his voice, "is your primary charge." He opened the doors, and Abigail gasped. The room was the most magnificent library she had ever seen. It was 2 stories high, with a rolling ladder and a mezzanine that ran along the upper level, Books lined every wall from floor to ceiling, but it was, as he had said, in a state of beautiful, tragic chaos. Books were stacked on every available surface, on chairs, on tables, in precarious towers on the floor. It was not the library of a collector, it was the library of a passionate, voracious reader. Eleanor believed that books were meant to be lived in, not just displayed, Alistair said softly, a sad smile touching his lips. She would read 3 at a time, leaving them where she finished them. I have not had the heart to move a single one since she passed. Abigail looked around the room at the thousands of silent, waiting stories and felt not overwhelmed, but a profound sense of purpose. This was not a chore. This was a sacred trust. She could bring order to this room. She could honor the memory of the woman who had loved these books, and in doing so, perhaps she could bring a measure of peace to the man who still mourned her. "It is a magnificent collection," she said, her voice full of genuine awe. "It will be my honor to care for it." Her new life at the doctor's house settled into a quiet, comforting routine. Her days were spent in the library, a world away from the prying, pitying eyes of the town. She began the monumental task of cataloging the collection, her librarian's soul delighting in the work. She would carefully take down each book, run her hand over its cover, clean the dust from its pages, and create a neat, handwritten card for it before finding it a proper home on the shelves. Each book was a small connection to the woman she had never known, and to the man she was beginning to. Alistair was a man of routine. He would leave early each morning for his rounds at the small town hospital and to see patients in his office. He would return in the late afternoon, often looking weary, the weight of his town's ailments on his shoulders. Abigail, taking her role as housekeeper seriously, would always have a hot meal waiting for him. Their dinners were quiet affairs, but never silent. They were two solitary people, long accustomed to their own company, but they found in each other a comfortable, easy companionship. They would discuss the books she had catalogued that day, their conversations weaving through history, poetry, and philosophy. He was a man of science, but he possessed a deep appreciation for the arts, and he listened to her opinions with a focused, respectful interest that she found both novel and deeply gratifying. They discovered a shared, unspoken understanding of grief. They never spoke of it directly, but it was a quiet undercurrent in their conversations. He would tell a small story about Eleanor, a memory sparked by a book they were discussing, and Abigail would listen, offering not empty condolences but the quiet, empathetic presence of someone who understood loss. She, in turn, found herself able to speak of her own quiet disappointments, of the life of unfulfilled duty she had led, without feeling the sting of pity. He did not pity her, he understood her. They began to care for each other in small, almost imperceptible ways. He noticed her squinting in the dim evening light of the library, and the next day, a beautiful new brass reading lamp appeared on the desk she had claimed as her own. She noticed that he often skipped lunch, so she began leaving a small tray with a sandwich and a glass of milk in his study for him to find when he returned. These were not the grand gestures of a dramatic courtship, but the quiet, thoughtful acts of two people beginning to build a life around each other. One evening, weeks after her arrival, Alistair came home looking more exhausted than she had ever seen him. A young boy from a nearby farm had been badly injured in a tractor accident, and Alistair had spent the entire day in surgery, fighting to save the boy's leg. He barely touched his dinner, his face etched with a deep weariness. After the meal, he simply said, "Will you join me in the library, Abigail?" She followed him in. He did not pick up a book. He sank into his favorite armchair by the fire and closed his eyes. Abigail, sensing he needed not conversation, but simply a peaceful presence, picked up her own book and settled into the chair opposite him. For over an hour, the only sounds were the crackling of the fire and the soft turning of her pages. Finally, he spoke, his eyes still closed. "Thank you, Abigail," he murmured. "For what?" she asked softly. "For this," he said, gesturing vaguely to the quiet room. "For the peace. This house. It feels like a home again." His words, a simple, heartfelt admission, were more intimate than any declaration of love. They were a recognition of the profound change she had brought to his life, to his world. Later that night, long after Alistair had retired to bed, Abigail was still at work in the library, too energized by her progress to sleep. She was on the rolling ladder, carefully placing a set of leather-bound poetry books on a high shelf, when she misjudged a step. The ladder wobbled, and with a small cry she lost her balance. She did not fall. A pair of strong, steady hands caught her, breaking her fall and holding her securely. It was Alistair. He had come down for a glass of water and had seen her teetering on the ladder. "Are you all right?" he asked, his voice rough with concern. He was still holding her, his arms wrapped around her waist, her body pressed against his. "Yes," she whispered, her heart hammering against her ribs. "Yes, I'm fine. Thank you." She was intensely aware of his closeness, of the warmth of his hands through the fabric of her dress, of the clean, masculine scent of him. She looked up at him, and he looked down at her, his face illuminated by the soft glow of the single lamp she had left on. The professional distance between them, the carefully maintained boundaries of employer and employee, evaporated in an instant. He was no longer just the town doctor or her kind benefactor. He was Alistair, a man. And the look in his eyes was not one of gentle friendship. It was a look of deep, undeniable and long-suppressed desire. The air crackled, the silence in the library now filled with a new, dangerous and thrilling kind of story, one that was just about to be written. The world seemed to shrink to the small, breathless space between them in the dimly lit library. Alistair's hands were still firmly on Abigail's waist, his grip the only thing preventing her from collapsing, though whether from the near fall or from his sudden, startling proximity, she could not say. She was acutely aware of everything, the strength in his hands, the warmth of his body so close to hers, the faint, clean scent of antiseptic mixed with old books, the concerned, searching look in his deep blue eyes. The moment stretched, taut and shimmering with unspoken emotion. It was a place outside of time, where they were not a doctor and his housekeeper, but simply a man and a woman. It was Alistair who broke the spell. He seemed to realize their position with a jolt, and he quickly, almost reluctantly, released her, stepping back. A dark flush crept up his neck. "My apologies, Abigail," he said, his voice a low, formal rumble that sounded strained. I overstepped." "No," she whispered, steadying herself on the edge of a bookshelf, her own cheeks burning. "You saved me from a fall. I am the one who should apologize for being so careless at this hour." But they both knew it had been more than that. The air was thick with the truth of what had passed between them, their carefully constructed arrangement. The safe, professional distance they had maintained had been shattered. They were left standing in the wreckage, unsure of the new rules of engagement. "Perhaps it is best we retire for the night," Alistair said, his voice still stiff. He cleared his throat. "We can discuss the completion of the library catalogue in the morning." He gave her a curt, formal nod and quickly exited the library, leaving Abigail with her heart hammering and her mind in a state of utter turmoil. She had come to this house seeking sanctuary and a quiet purpose. She had not, under any circumstances, expected to feel this profound, confusing, and undeniably thrilling connection to her reclusive employer. The days that followed were defined by a new and delicate awkwardness. They were both intensely aware of the shift between them. Their dinner conversations became more stilted, both of them carefully avoiding any topic that might stray into personal territory. Yet the silence was more charged than ever before. Abigail would find her gaze drifting to him, noticing the way his hands moved as he spoke, or the thoughtful expression on his face as he listened. She would catch him watching her from across the room, his eyes holding a new, unreadable emotion, before he would quickly look away. Their quiet, ordered world could not remain isolated forever. Abigail, in her role as housekeeper, eventually had to venture into the town of Harmony Creek for supplies. It was an ordeal she had been dreading. As she walked down Main Street, she felt the weight of the town's collective gaze upon her. Doors would open a crack, curtains would twitch in windows. Conversations would hush as she passed, only to resume in a flurry of whispers. She was no longer just Abigail Lytton, the quiet librarian. She was now a character in a local drama, the jilted bride, the tragic spinster. And now, a new, more scandalous chapter had been added to her story. Mrs. Gable, the postmistress and the town's chief purveyor of gossip, made a point of stopping her outside the general store. "Abigail, dear," she said, her voice dripping with false sympathy. "So good to see you out and about. We were all so concerned, but I hear you've landed on your feet, keeping house for the good doctor. How convenient." The insinuation was as sharp and as venomous as a snake bite. Elsie's face flushed. "Dr. Finch was kind enough to offer me a position, yes," she said, her voice polite but firm. "A position," Mrs. Gable repeated, savoring the word. "Of course. Well, you must tell us all about it at the church bake sale on Saturday. We are all just dying to hear how you are settling in." The bake sale. It was an annual town event, a public gathering she could not gracefully avoid without fueling even more gossip. She felt a knot of dread tighten in her stomach. She would have to face them all. When she told Alistair about the encounter that evening, his face hardened. "You do not have to go, Abigail," he said, his voice tight with anger on her behalf. "You are not required to subject yourself to their petty cruelties." "And what would they say then?" she countered, a weary resignation in her tone. "That the poor shamed woman is now hiding away in the doctor's house? That she is too embarrassed to show her face? No, that will only make it worse. I must go. I must show them that I am not broken." He looked at her, his admiration for her quiet strength warring with his protective instincts. He was silent for a long moment. "Then you will not go alone," he said finally. "I will accompany you." Abigail was shocked. "But you never attend these town functions." "The town has seen fit to make our business their primary source of entertainment," he said, a grim smile touching his lips. "I believe it is time we gave them a new scene to whisper about. We will go together." And so on Saturday afternoon, the most surprising couple in Harmony Creek walked side by side into the church social hall. The room, filled with the cheerful chatter of the town, fell into a sudden, stunned silence as Dr. Alistair Finch, a man who had not attended a bake sale in over a decade, entered with the jilted bride Abigail Lytton on his arm. They were an island in a sea of stares. Abigail could feel the heat of 100 eyes on her, and her courage began to waver. She felt Alistair's hand gently touch her elbow, a small, steadying gesture. "Chin up, Abigail," he murmured. "We are merely two friends enjoying a slice of pie." They made their way to a small table, a bubble of silence following them. It was Mrs. Gable, of course, who dared to breach it. She bustled over, her face a mask of predatory concern. "Doctor, Abigail, what a surprise to see you both," she trilled. She turned her attention to Abigail, her eyes sharp. "Abigail, dear, you must be so grateful for the doctor to take you in after your unpleasantness. It is a true act of Christian charity." The words were designed to put Abigail firmly in her place as a pathetic object of pity, a charity case. Before Abigail could even respond, Alistair set his teacup down with a soft but definitive click. He looked at Mrs. Gable, his expression not angry, but one of cool academic correction. "There seems to be a misunderstanding, Martha," he said, his calm voice carrying in the quiet room. "There is no charity involved. I am the one who is grateful." Mrs. Gable blinked, momentarily speechless. "For years," Alistair continued, his gaze sweeping over the nearby tables, his voice clear and steady for all to hear, "my home has been in a state of disarray. My late wife's magnificent library, a collection of immense personal and scholarly value, was a chaotic mess. I was in desperate need of a professional, someone with the rare combination of a librarian's skill and a sensitive soul to restore it. Miss Lytton, in her great kindness, agreed to take on this monumental task for me." He then turned to Abigail, a look of profound and public respect on his face. "Her work has been a gift. She is not my housekeeper. She is my most valued colleague and my dearest friend. The town of Harmony Creek is fortunate to have a woman of her character and intellect among us. I know I certainly am." The silence that followed was of a different kind. It was a silence of shock, of reassessment. Alistair Finch had not just defended her. He had praised her, elevated her, and publicly declared his deep respect and friendship for her. He had completely rewritten their narrative in front of the entire town. Mrs. Gable, her face flushed with a mixture of surprise and embarrassment, could only stammer a faint, "Oh, I see." Alistair then smiled gently at Abigail. "Shall we try the apple pie?" he asked, as if nothing out of the ordinary had happened. As they walked away, leaving a stunned and whispering crowd in their wake, Abigail felt a lightness in her chest she had not felt in years. He had not rescued her from her humiliation. He had stood beside her in the middle of it, and, with the simple, powerful weapon of the truth, had made the humiliation disappear. The whispers would not stop, she knew. But now, they would be different. And as she shared a slice of pie with the quiet town doctor, she knew with a certainty that warmed her to her very soul that she was no longer alone. Their arrangement had begun as a prescription for their individual ailments, but it was slowly, beautifully, transforming into a cure for them both. Abigail awoke fully, the haze of sleep evaporating in the face of the raw, unguarded emotion in Alistair's eyes. The quiet infirmary, filled with the soft sleeping breaths of their patients, seemed to hold its own breath, creating a sacred, intimate space around them. He was kneeling beside her, holding her hand as if it were a precious, fragile thing, and his gaze was one of profound, open-hearted adoration. "Abigail," he began again, his voice a low, husky murmur that was both hesitant and determined. "For years, my life has been a matter of routine and responsibility. I have diagnosed ailments, prescribed remedies and mended broken bones. I have dealt in facts, in science, in the tangible mechanics of the human body. My heart, that was a room I had closed off long ago, a place preserved in memory." He squeezed her hand gently. "Then you came into my life. I offered you a position out of a sense of duty, a sense of propriety. But from the moment you began to bring order to my wife's chaotic library, you began to bring order to the chaos in my own soul. I admired your intelligence, your quiet dignity." His eyes drifted around the room at the cots filled with the sleeping townspeople she had cared for so tirelessly. "But these past weeks, watching you work, watching you care for these people with such boundless compassion and unwavering strength, I have seen the true nature of your spirit. You are not just a librarian or a housekeeper, Abigail. You are a healer. You have healed this house, you have healed this town, and you have healed me." He took a deep breath, his gaze returning to hers, clear and certain. "My admiration has grown into something far deeper, a feeling I never thought I would experience again. I am in love with you, Abigail Lytton. I love your kindness, I love your wisdom, and I love the incredible, resilient strength of your heart." The confession, so simple, so direct, so utterly sincere, washed over Abigail like a warm, healing wave. It was a truth her own heart had known for weeks, but had not dared to name. She had found herself listening for the sound of his car in the evenings, her day not feeling complete until their quiet conversations by the fire. She had felt a fierce, protective pride in his work, in his goodness. She had fallen in love with this quiet, honorable man who had seen her worth when she thought she had none left. Tears welled in her eyes, but for the first time in a very long time, they were tears of pure, unadulterated joy. "Oh, Alistair," she whispered, her free hand coming up to gently cup his cheek. His skin was rough with the stubble of a long day, and she could feel the weary tension in his jaw. "I believe I have been falling in love with you since the day you stood beside me at the altar, when I was so alone. You have shown me more kindness and respect than I have ever known." A magnificent smile transformed his tired face, chasing away the lines of exhaustion. "Then my diagnosis was correct," he murmured. "It seems we share the same affliction." He leaned forward slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away, but she did not. She leaned into him, meeting him halfway, her heart soaring with a feeling she had thought was reserved for the heroines in her books. Their first kiss was not the fiery, demanding passion of youth. It was a kiss of profound tenderness, a soft, searching, and deeply comforting union. It was a kiss that spoke of shared loneliness, of mutual respect, and of the quiet, unexpected joy of finding a home in another's soul. It was a remedy, a cure for a lifetime of quiet heartbreak. When they finally broke apart, he rested his forehead against hers, his eyes closed. "The prescription I offered you when you came here was for a job," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. It was a practical solution to a practical problem, but it was the wrong prescription. He pulled back to look at her, his blue eyes shining with a new, determined light. "I want to write a new one, Abigail, a permanent one." He stood up, pulling her gently to her feet. He stood before her, no longer a doctor or an employer, but a man making the most important declaration of his life. "The arrangement we have is a fiction," he said. "You are not my housekeeper. You are my partner. You are my equal in every way. And I cannot bear the thought of another day passing with you living under my roof as anything less than my wife." He took both of her hands in his. "I am asking you to marry me, Abigail, not as part of a deal, not as a remedy for the town's gossip, but as the one and only desire of my heart. I want to spend the rest of my life sharing my home, my books, and my heart with you. Be my wife." At that moment, from one of the cots, a small, sleepy voice piped up. It was the young girl Alistair had been so worried about. Her fever had broken during the night, and her eyes were clear for the first time in days. She looked at the doctor and the librarian, holding hands in the soft lamplight, and a small, weak smile touched her lips. The crisis was passing. The fever that had gripped the town was breaking, just as the loneliness that had gripped their two hearts was finally, irrevocably, gone. Abigail looked at Alistair, her own heart so full it felt as if it might overflow. The man who had left her at the altar had offered her a life of quiet desperation, a marriage of convenience and pity. This man, this good, kind, honorable man, was offering her a partnership of the soul. "Yes," she said, her voice ringing with a clear, joyful certainty. "Yes, Alistair, I will marry you." He let out a breath he seemed to have been holding for a decade, and his answering smile was as bright and as hopeful as the coming dawn. He pulled her into his arms, holding her close, and in the quiet of the makeshift infirmary, surrounded by the sleeping souls they had cared for together, their new life began not with a formal contract, but with a promise sealed by a kiss and witnessed by the first light of a healing world. With the passing of the influenza crisis, a season of quiet joy settled upon Harmony Creek, and nowhere was this peace more deeply felt than in the home of Dr. Alistair Finch. The makeshift infirmary in the dining room was dismantled, the lingering scent of sickness replaced once more by the familiar aroma of beeswax and old books. The house, having served its purpose as a hospital, now began its true transformation into a home for two. The engagement of Dr. Finch and Abigail Lytton was the talk of the town, but the whispers were no longer malicious. They were imbued with a sense of wonder and romance. The story of how the quiet doctor and the steadfast librarian had worked side by side to save the town had become a local legend. Their partnership had been forged in the crucible of crisis, and the community now saw their union not as a scandal, but as something right and fitting. Their days fell into a new, happy rhythm. They planned their wedding, a simple ceremony to be held in the spring in Abigail's own rose garden, which she had begun to tend to again with a renewed passion. They spent their evenings in the library, not as employer and employee, but as true intellectual companions, their shared love for literature a constant, comforting bond. Alistair would read to her, his deep voice a soothing melody, and she would listen, her heart full. The loneliness that had defined both of their lives for so long had vanished, replaced by a profound and peaceful companionship. Abigail, in particular, blossomed. Under the warm sun of Alistair's unconditional love and respect, she shed the last vestiges of the timid, apologetic spinster she had once believed herself to be. Her natural intelligence, her quiet wit, and her deep well of compassion were now able to flourish. She was a woman who at 55 was finally truly coming into her own. It was on a crisp, late autumn afternoon that the ghost of her past decided to return. Abigail was in town, purchasing seeds for her spring garden at the general store, when the bell above the door chimed. She looked up and her blood ran cold. Standing in the doorway, looking thinner, shabbier, and somehow smaller than she remembered, was Mr. Thomas Cole. He saw her at the same moment. A flicker of surprise, followed by a strange, calculating expression, crossed his face. He sauntered over to her, a confident, predatory smile on his lips that did not reach his eyes. "Abigail, my dear," he said, his voice oozing a false charm. "What a surprise to see you. I heard a rumor you were still in town. I must confess I worried about you." "There was no need for your concern, Mr. Cole," Abigail replied, her voice steady, though her heart was pounding. She would not let him see how his presence unnerved her. "Nonsense," he said, leaning closer. "I felt just terrible about how things ended. A misunderstanding, really. But it seems you have landed on your feet. I hear you are now keeping house for the good doctor. A respectable position, I suppose, for a woman in your circumstances." His condescension was as palpable as it had been on their wedding day. But Abigail was no longer the same woman. "Doctor, Finch and I are to be married," she said, her voice clear and firm. Thomas Cole's charming facade dropped. His eyes widened in genuine shock, which was quickly replaced by a look of undisguised, envious fury. He had discarded her, believing her to be worthless. To learn that she had not just survived, but had managed to secure a man of Dr. Finch's stature and wealth, was a bitter pill for his pride to swallow. "Married?" he scoffed, recovering quickly. "To the old doctor. Well, isn't that a convenient arrangement? I must say you work fast, Abigail." He lowered his voice. "One wonders what the town would think if they knew the real reason I left. If they knew that our beloved saintly doctor had been visiting you privately before I had even arrived in town. A sordid little affair, wouldn't you say? It might tarnish his pristine reputation." The threat was clear. He was going to twist the story, paint her as an adulteress and Alistair as her co-conspirator, all to salvage his own pathetic pride and likely to extort money from them. The old Abigail would have been terrified, devastated by such a threat. But the new Abigail, the woman who was loved and respected by Alistair Finch, felt only a cold, clarifying anger. "You are a desperate and pathetic man, Mr. Cole," she said, her voice low and sharp. "And your lies are as cheap as your character. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have seeds to buy." She turned her back on him and walked to the counter, her hands trembling but her resolve like steel. That evening she told Alistair everything. She did not weep or show fear. She recounted the conversation with a calm, factual precision, her outrage directed not at her own predicament, but at the audacity of the man to threaten Alistair's good name. Alistair listened, his expression growing darker with each word. When she had finished, he was silent for a long moment. "He is trying to blackmail us," he said finally, his voice a low, dangerous growl. "He believes he can frighten you, and that I will pay him for his silence to avoid a scandal." "What are we going to do?" Abigail asked. "We," he said, emphasizing the word, "are going to finish this. Not with money, but with the truth. He has underestimated you, Abigail, and he has severely underestimated me." The next day, Thomas Cole received a short, formal note delivered by Alistair's office boy. It requested his presence at the town diner at noon for a meeting with Dr. Finch and Miss Lytton to discuss a matter of mutual interest. Cole, assuming his threat had worked and that they were ready to negotiate a payment, arrived promptly, a smug, triumphant look on his face. He found them waiting in a booth at the back of the crowded diner. Alistair sat calmly, a cup of coffee before him. Abigail sat beside him, her expression serene. "Finch, Miss Lytton," Cole said, sliding into the booth opposite them. "I'm so glad you've decided to be reasonable." "We are not here to be reasonable, Mr. Cole," Alistair said, his voice cool and clear, loud enough for the nearby tables to hear. "We are here to give you a final public opportunity to retract your slanderous accusations." Cole's smug expression faltered. "I have no idea what you're talking about." "You accosted my fiancé in the general store yesterday," Alistair continued, his voice steady. "You threatened to spread vicious lies about her character and mine unless we paid you. Is that not correct?" Heads were beginning to turn. The lunchtime chatter in the diner was quieting down. "That is a preposterous accusation," Cole blustered, his face beginning to redden. "Is it?" Alistair said. He then looked past Cole, to the owner of the diner who was watching from behind the counter. "Mr. Henderson, you have known me for 30 years. You have known Miss Lytton for her entire life. You also, I believe, had the misfortune of dealing with Mr. Cole here when he refused to pay his boarding bill at your sister's inn last spring. I ask you, whose word do you trust?" Mr. Henderson, a large, honest man, wiped his hands on his apron and glared at Cole. "I trust yours, Doc, and I trust Miss Abigail's. This fellow," he said, pointing a thick finger at Cole, "is a no-good charlatan." A murmur of agreement went through the diner. People who had been witness to Cole's flashy courtship and sudden departure now saw him in a new light. "You cannot prove anything," Cole hissed, his face now pale. "I don't have to," Alistair said calmly. "This town knows us. They know Abigail's character. They know mine, and now they know yours." He stood up, placing a few coins on the table for their coffee. He then offered his hand to Abigail. "Come, my dear, I believe we are finished here." He helped her from the booth, and as they turned to leave, the entire diner was staring at Thomas Cole with open contempt. He was no longer a man of mystery. He was a common blackmailer, exposed and shamed. As they walked out into the bright afternoon sun, Abigail felt a profound sense of release. The last ghost of her past had been faced, not in the shadows, but in the full light of day, and it had vanished, powerless against the combined strength of their love and the community's respect. Alistair took her hand, his thumb stroking her knuckles. "I believe," he said, a slow smile spreading across his face, "that your cure is now complete." "Ours, Alistair," she corrected him softly, her own heart soaring with a love so powerful it felt boundless. "Our cure." The public disgrace of Thomas Cole had a cleansing effect on the town of Harmony Creek. It was as if a low-grade fever of gossip and speculation had finally broken. The story of his attempted blackmail and of the quiet, dignified way Dr. Finch and Miss Lytton had handled it became the definitive version of events, shared over picket fences and at the counter of the general store. The town, in a rare moment of complete unity, had chosen its heroes. Any lingering pity for Abigail was replaced by a fierce, protective admiration. For Abigail and Alistair, the aftermath was a period of profound and quiet peace. The final ghost had been laid to rest. There were no more secrets, no more threats looming on the horizon. There was only the simple, beautiful truth of their love and the joyful anticipation of the life they were about to begin together. They set the date for their wedding, the last Saturday of October, when the autumn foliage would be at its most brilliant, a fiery testament to the beauty of life's later seasons. The preparations were a joyful, shared endeavor. It was nothing like the lonely, anxious process Abigail had endured for her first, ill-fated wedding. This time, there was no pretense, no attempt to fit into a mold that was not her own. Alistair, with a quiet and loving insistence, made it clear that this day was to be a reflection of her, of them. He would leave his practice early some afternoons to help her in her garden, his large, gentle hands, usually so skilled with a scalpel, proving surprisingly adept at pruning rose bushes. They worked side by side, the comfortable silence between them punctuated by easy laughter and shared plans. They decided to hold the ceremony in the garden itself, the place that was Abigail's truest expression of her own patient, nurturing spirit. Her brother, William, arrived from Ohio a few days before the wedding. He was a quiet, sturdy man with his sister's kind eyes. He met Alistair with a reserved but thorough appraisal, the protective older brother assessing the man who held his sister's fragile heart. But after a single evening spent in conversation with Alistair by the fire, William's reserve melted away. "I have not seen her this happy since we were children, Doctor," William said to Alistair, his voice thick with emotion as they shared a glass of whiskey late one night. "For years, I have carried a guilt that her life was sacrificed for our family." "Yep, you have given her back her own story." "On the contrary, Mr. Lytton," Alistair replied, his gaze soft as he looked at Abigail, who was across the room, showing his late wife's collection of pressed flowers to her nephew. "She has given me mine." The wedding day was perfect. The air was crisp and clean, and the sun shone with a gentle golden light, illuminating the fiery reds, oranges, and golds of the autumn leaves. The ceremony was held in the heart of Abigail's rose garden, under a simple archway woven from autumn branches and the last defiant blooms of the season. The guests were few, but they were the ones who mattered. Abigail's brother and his family. The pastor from St. Jude's, his face beaming with genuine happiness for the woman whose humiliation he had witnessed. A few of Abigail's close friends from her book club, and the small, loyal staff from Alistair's home. Abigail wore a dress of deep cranberry-colored silk, the color of a perfect autumn leaf. It was a gown that skimmed her figure with an elegant grace, its simplicity a testament to her quiet confidence. She carried a small bouquet of asters and chrysanthemums from her own garden. As she walked down the grassy aisle on her brother's arm, she looked at Alistair, who waited for her, his handsome, weathered face filled with a love so profound it took her breath away. He had not seen her dress before the ceremony, and as she approached, his eyes widened in silent, heartfelt admiration. He took her hand, his touch warm and steady. Their vows were not the flowery, poetic promises of youth. They were the simple, sturdy pledges of two mature souls who understood the true value of companionship. "I have known a great love, and I have known a great loneliness," Alistair said, his voice clear and strong, his eyes never leaving hers. "I thought my heart was a closed book, but you, Abigail, have taught me how to turn the page. I promise to be your partner, your friend, and your steadfast companion. I promise to cherish your kindness, to honor your strength, and to love you faithfully for all the days of my life." Abigail's own vows were spoken in a voice thick with joyful tears. "I came to you seeking a sanctuary, a quiet place to mend a broken heart," she said. "But you gave me more than a job, more than a home. You gave me your respect, your friendship, and your heart. You saw a worth in me that I had forgotten existed. I promise to fill your home with life, to share your burdens, and to love you with all that I am, for all of my days." When the pastor pronounced them husband and wife, the small garden erupted in heartfelt applause. Alistair's kiss was tender, deep, and full of the promise of a peaceful, shared future. It was a kiss that sealed not a desperate bargain, but a joyful, chosen union. The reception was a simple, happy affair in Abigail's small, cozy house. The rooms were filled with the scent of roasted chicken and fresh-baked bread, and the sound of easy laughter. It was a celebration not of wealth or status, but of community and love. Alistair, the quiet town doctor, seemed more at ease here, surrounded by these genuine, hard-working people than he ever had at any formal gathering. Later, as the evening drew to a close and the last of the guests had departed, Alistair and Abigail stood alone in the moonlit rose garden. A gentle, cool breeze rustled the last of the leaves on the trees. "Mrs. Finch," Alistair said, testing the name on his tongue. He smiled, pulling her close. "It suits you." "It does," she agreed, leaning her head against his shoulder, a feeling of profound peace settling over her. She looked around at her garden, at her small, familiar house. This place was no longer a symbol of her quiet, solitary life. It was now the place where her new life, her true life, had begun. "Are you happy, Abigail?" he asked, his voice a soft murmur against her hair. She lifted her head to look at him, her face illuminated by the soft glow of the moon. She thought of the woman she had been just a few months ago, humiliated, abandoned, her future a terrifying blank slate. And she looked at the man before her, her husband, her friend, the unexpected cure for a lifetime of quiet aches. "Alistair," she said, her voice full of a wonder that she knew would never fade. "I did not know it was possible to be this happy." He smiled and kissed her again, a long, slow, and deeply contented kiss under the vast, star-filled Montana sky. The lonely spinster and the quiet doctor were gone. In their place stood a husband and a wife, two souls who had found their second spring in the autumn of their years. The first year of their marriage passed in a season of quiet, contented joy. The Finch house, once a monument to a past sorrow, was now a home in the truest sense of the word. Abigail's touch was everywhere. Her beloved roses, transplanted from her old garden, now thrived alongside the late Eleanor's, their different colors and varieties blending into a beautiful, harmonious tapestry. The library, once a chaotic testament to a single reader's passion, was now a perfectly ordered yet deeply welcoming space for two. Her books sat comfortably on the shelves next to his, their spines a silent conversation between old friends. Abigail found a new purpose, not just as a wife, but as a partner. She became the quiet, efficient manager of Alistair's life, organizing his chaotic household and creating a peaceful sanctuary for him to return to after his long, demanding days. She would listen with genuine interest as he spoke of his patients, her quiet empathy a soothing balm for the burdens he carried as the town's sole physician. Alistair, in turn, cherished her. He had lived a life of respected solitude, but he had not realized how truly lonely he was until Abigail filled his home with her gentle presence. He loved the quiet hum of her voice as she read by the fire, the sight of her in the garden, her hands covered in soil, a serene smile on her face. He had thought that great, passionate love was a chapter of his life that had ended years ago, but he was discovering that the love of one's autumn years was a different, perhaps even richer, vintage. It was a love built not on fiery passion, but on the solid, comforting bedrock of companionship, mutual respect, and a deep, shared understanding of life's fragilities. Their quiet happiness was their world. But Abigail, with her innate sense of community, began to look beyond the borders of her own contentment. She saw the needs of Harmony Creek with a clear-eyed compassion. She saw the children who had little to do after school, the young mothers who were often isolated in their farmhouses, the men who had few diversions beyond the local tavern. One evening, as they sat in the library, she turned to Alistair with a thoughtful expression. "My old library, the one in the town hall basement," she began, "it was always too small and too dark. It was a place for books, but not for people." "It was always a comfort to me," Alistair said, smiling. "To us, yes," she agreed, "because we already knew the joy of reading. But what about the children who don't? What about the people who need more than just books, a place to gather, to learn, to simply be?" She leaned forward, her eyes bright with a new idea. "This town, Alistair, it has a church for the soul and a clinic for the body, but it doesn't have a place for the mind, a true heart for the community." He looked at her, intrigued. "What are you proposing, my dear?" "I am proposing that we build one," she said, her voice full of a sudden, passionate energy. "Not just a library, a community center, a large, bright room where children can do their lessons after school, a comfortable space where the women's book club can meet instead of crowding into someone's parlor, a place with newspapers from the city, with classes on everything from basic accounting to canning vegetables, a place that belongs to everyone." Alistair listened, utterly captivated. It was a brilliant idea, a vision born of her deep understanding of the town's needs and her lifelong belief in the power of knowledge and community. He saw the potential immediately, not just for the town, but for Abigail herself. This was not just a project, it was her calling. "It is a magnificent idea," he said, his voice full of admiration, "and I know just the place." The next day, he took her to see the old abandoned Miller building on Main Street. It was a large, handsome brick structure that had once been a prosperous general store but had sat empty for years. It was in a state of disrepair, but it had large windows and a solid foundation. "I will purchase the building," Alistair stated simply, "and the foundation my family maintains for tax purposes can be repurposed. It will become the funding arm for the Harmony Creek Community Center. You, my dear, will be its director. You will have your own budget, your own board, and complete autonomy to build your vision." Tears welled in Abigail's eyes. He was not just supporting her idea, he was empowering her. He was giving her a legacy of her own. The project became their shared passion. They were a formidable team. Alistair, with his sharp mind and respected position, handled the legalities, the finances, and the contractors. Abigail, with her clear vision and practical wisdom, designed the interior. She insisted on low shelves in the children's section, comfortable armchairs for the elderly, and a large, welcoming fireplace in the center of the main room. The news of the project sent a wave of excitement through Harmony Creek. The initial skepticism that had greeted their marriage had long since vanished. Now the townspeople saw them as a team, a partnership that was dedicated to the betterment of the community. People began to volunteer. The mayor helped expedite the permits. Local farmers offered their time and labor to help with the renovations. The women from Abigail's book club organized a massive book drive. The community center was not just a gift from the Finches, it was becoming a project built by the entire town. One cool evening, as the renovations were nearing completion, Alistair and Abigail stood across the street, looking at the building. A warm light spilled from its new large windows, and the sound of hammering could still be heard as volunteers worked late into the night. "Look at what you've done, Abigail," Alistair said, his voice full of a quiet awe. "You have given this town a new heart." "We have, Alistair," she corrected him, her hand finding his. "I only had the dream. You gave it a foundation." He smiled, pulling her close. "It seems we are good at that, you and I. Building things that last." The grand opening of the Harmony Creek Library and Community Center was the biggest celebration the town had seen in decades. The entire community was there. The mayor made a speech, praising the vision and generosity of Dr. and Mrs. Finch. When it was Abigail's turn to speak, she stood before the crowd, not as the jilted bride who had once been the subject of their pity, but as a respected and beloved community leader. She did not speak of books or buildings. She spoke of hope, of second chances, and of the power of a community that comes together to care for its own. Alistair watched her from the side, his heart full. He saw the woman he loved, in the full flower of her purpose, her spirit as radiant as the afternoon sun. The quiet librarian who had once curated stories was now creating them, her own life having become the most inspiring tale of all. Their love had not just healed their own two hearts, it was now a beacon, a source of warmth and light for the entire town. The years spun by, each one weaving another thread into the rich tapestry of Abigail and Alistair's life together. The roaring 20s gave way to the somber realities of the Great Depression, and yet the small town of Harmony Creek seemed to possess a resilience that many other communities lacked. The source of that resilience, many would say, could be found in the warm, welcoming light that emanated from the brick building on Main Street, the Harmony Creek Library and Community Center. The center, born from Abigail's vision and Alistair's resources, had become the undeniable heart of the town. It was more than a library. It was a lifeline. In its warm, sunlit rooms, children whose parents could not afford coal for their own hearths came to do their homework. Farmers gathered in the evenings to read newspapers from the city and quietly debate politics. Young mothers, isolated on their rural homesteads, formed clubs, sharing knowledge and friendship. During the hardest years of the Depression, the center's kitchen, run by Abigail and a team of volunteers, served hot soup to anyone in need, no questions asked. Abigail and Alistair, now in their 70s, were the town's most beloved figures. They had grown old together gracefully, their love a quiet, steady flame that warmed everyone around them. Their home was a haven of peace, filled with books, flowers, and the comfortable silence of two people who knew each other's souls completely. They had never been blessed with children of their own, but in a way the entire town had become their family. They had nurtured its growth, healed its ailments, and cultivated its spirit. One crisp autumn afternoon, some 15 years after their wedding, the entire town gathered once more at St. Jude's Community Church. This time, however, the atmosphere was not one of scandal or pity, but of deep, heartfelt celebration. The town was hosting a ceremony to honor Dr. Alistair Finch on the occasion of his retirement after 40 years of service. Abigail sat in the front pew watching as her husband, his hair now completely white, his movements slower but his eyes as kind and as sharp as ever, listened to the mayor give a lengthy, laudatory speech. The mayor spoke of Alistair's tireless devotion, of the generations of children he had brought into the world, of the lives he had saved. Then he turned his attention to Abigail. "But we all know," the mayor said, his voice ringing with affection, "that for the last 15 years the good doctor has not been working alone. He has had by his side a partner whose wisdom, compassion, and vision have healed this town in a different, but no less profound way. Mrs. Finch," he said, looking directly at Abigail, "you have been the heart of our community's recovery. Together, you and the doctor have been our town's greatest cure." The entire congregation rose to their feet, their applause echoing through the small church. Abigail's eyes filled with tears as she looked at Alistair, who was smiling at her with a love so profound it seemed to fill the entire room. Later that evening, they sat alone on a bench in her rose garden under a sky full of stars. The air was cool and smelled of damp earth and the last lingering scent of roses. "It was in that same church," Abigail said softly, her voice a little frail with age but still clear as a bell. "I stood at that altar and felt as though my life had ended. I thought my story was over and that it was a tragedy." "It was not an ending," Alistair said, taking her hand, its skin as soft and as delicate as a dried flower petal. "It was merely a plot twist, the most wonderful plot twist in history." He chuckled softly. "I often think of Thomas Cole. I heard he lost everything in the crash of '29 and ended his days a bitter, lonely man. He spent his life chasing what he called vitality, and he never found it. He looked at you and saw only age. He was a fool. He missed the glorious, indomitable life that burned within you." "He was a catalyst," Abigail said, her expression serene. "A necessary heartbreak. Without the pain of that day, I would never have known the joy of this one." She squeezed his hand. "He left me at the altar, Alistair. But you met me there, and you have stood by my side ever since." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the moon rise over the quiet town. Their love story had become a local legend, a tale told to children and grandchildren. It was the story of the quiet doctor and the spinster librarian, a story of a second chance when all hope seemed lost. Their legacy was not in a great fortune or a famous name. It was here, in the fabric of this small town. It was in the laughter of the children leaving the community center, their arms full of books. It was in the quiet gratitude of the families who had found help and hope within its walls. It was in the simple, enduring proof that a life of quiet service, of shared purpose and of deep, abiding love was the most successful life one could ever hope to live. "Are you cold, my dear?" Alistair asked, noticing a slight shiver run through her. "No, my love," she whispered, leaning her head on his shoulder. "I don't think I shall ever be cold again." He wrapped his arm around her, and they sat together under the vast, starry sky, two old souls whose hearts had found their perfect rhythm, their love a quiet, steady beacon in the heart of Harmony Creek, a testament to the truth that it is never, ever too late for a happy ending. Life's greatest heartbreaks are often the catalysts for its most beautiful chapters. Rejection is not a final judgment on your worth, but merely a redirection onto a path you were always meant to find. Do not fear the autumn of your years, for it is a season that can yield the richest and most meaningful harvest. True love is not about finding someone to save you from your loneliness, but about finding someone to share a beautiful, purposeful solitude with. It is never too late to write a new story for yourself, and the most extraordinary love is often the one that finds you when you have finally learned to love the life you already have.